Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on data integrity. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Leah Morse with Qualtrics. I'm going to be kind of coordinating the webinar today, but I'm also joined by Matt Bronner from Sequence and Hutch Gray from Qualtrics today. They both have some really great content to share with you, but before we dive in, I'm going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. So first of all, this session is being recorded today, and we'll send out the recording by email to all of our registrants once it's available. Next, we will be addressing questions at the end of our time today, but please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation at any time using the Q&A panel. You may have also noticed a poll pop up for you when you join the meeting on what area you're most interested in making data integrity improvements. So if you haven't already taken that poll, I'd encourage you to go ahead and do that now. So while you're working on that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce your presenter, Matt Bronner from Sequence. Matt has over 18 years of experience working with drug and medical device companies within the biopharmaceutical industry. As a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt with experience holding various roles within quality, engineering, automation, IT, manufacturing, and organizational excellence, Matt strives to deliver innovative and high-value quality solutions. He's currently a director with Sequence based out of Morrisville, North Carolina, and we at Qualtrics are very excited to have him joining us for this presentation today. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Leah. Can you see the screen change?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thanks also for the folks at Qualtrics for hosting this data integrity webinar. So without further ado, data integrity. What is it? What are the common pitfalls, and how do you avoid them? Here's the, so I do have some FDA content in here. I want to let everybody know, the typical disclaimer you see on most FDA presentations, that they in fact have not gone through and evaluated the statements or comments in this slide deck. But this slide deck is indeed very current, and this presentation is based on the evaluation of our Sequence knowledge base. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, why would you listen to me around data integrity? It's been something that I do have a fair amount of experience with. I've handled remediations, a number of projects, post-merger QMS consolidations, and dealt with a lot of data integrity issues and correcting data integrity issues. I'm also have diverse experience across a number of different functional units within GXP environments, labs, manufacturing environments. Okay, so why am I passionate about data integrity? In a word, communication. You know, they say that knowledge is power, and data leads to knowledge. So it begs the question, what does bad data lead to? And I just had too many experiences in my past where bad data has led to a lack of confidence and slow business reactions that's hurt teams. So that's why I enjoy trying to help people with their data integrity problems. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Qualtrics again. One of the reasons we're putting on this presentation together is because we have a shared passion for effective and efficient compliance solutions. And of course, I would want to mention a little bit about Sequence, where our goal is to be able to simplify quality and compliance. We have 4 offices in the US with the headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we serve over 40 clients with about 200 consultants. A little bit about this presentation. Why listen to this presentation? Now, I know you can't read all the little boxes scanning by in the back, but this presentation is the compilation of about 40 data integrity presentations given over the past 3 years from places like the FDA, MHRA, ICH, just a lot of GXP-oriented organizations, regulator trainers, ISPE, and it also contains a lot of the lessons learned here at Sequence. One of our key drivers is to empower individuals with company knowledge and not just rely on an individual's knowledge. So to empower people to do a better job for our clients is one of our goals. Okay, getting into the presentation here. So what we're going to cover, what is data integrity? What are the common pitfalls of data integrity? And how do you avoid data integrity pitfalls? Let's start with the definition. Data integrity is the degree to which a collection of data is complete, consistent, and accurate. How do you know if something has data integrity? It's qualified as being ALCOA, and I'll go through this acronym. Attributable is data having information about who recorded the data and when or who performed the action and when. It's being legible. Of course, you have to be able to read the data. Contemporaneous. It should be captured at the time of performance. O is for original, an original observation or certified copy. And then the data should be accurate. It should be correct, complete, and consistent. So some real life examples of this. I'll go through them again with some real life examples. So attributable. One thing that we're probably all familiar with, who withdrew funds from your account and when? Around tax time, that's one thing. The value of something being attributable, it provides context about when something happened. Also, recording the who did something or what did something, it gives you some recourse to say, to look into any situation or try to resolve any problems or to confirm the data. L, the legible. The personal example would be, who has had an unreadable shopping list? You know, how many times have you gotten to the supermarket to buy something, you realize, oh geez, I can't tell exactly what was written down here. So legible, at the worst you could lose data, but at the least you're going to waste time trying to figure out what it's saying. Contemporaneous. Who's missed a meeting time because they didn't record the time when the meeting was set? This ensures we're not relying on a person's memory to remember something if we're indeed just writing down the data. And it's a way of hedging against inaccuracy in our data. Original. How much do you trust rumors? Because isn't a rumor a non-original and non-certified interpretation of an event? The value of having an original copy or a certified copy is you have a first-hand account that's not skewed by a secondary interpretation. And finally, accurate. Did your flight really depart on time? Now, this is the value this adds. It's valuable because you want to know if it's true or not. You want to know if you can have confidence in your departure time. Now, of course, you can be accurate and have one other piece of being accurate is and being original. Accurate is having complete information. A lot of times you'll have my flight was supposed to leave at 11 a.m. and the rest of the information that makes that complete is it leaves at 11 a.m. plus or minus an hour. Just a couple examples to make that acronym easier to understand. More on data integrity. Let's look at the history a little bit. So the overall message here is that we have a new branding of a similar issue, a similar law that's been around really since the CFR 210 and 211 was revised in 1986. Then in 21 CFR Part 11, people will be familiar with electronic records and electronic signatures, aka ERES. These are the laws. If you look at the first two blocks there with the red headings on the left, these are the laws. But then look what happened in the 2000s and 2010s. We have a lot of guidances. Keep in mind that guidances are not laws. They're the FDA's current thinking on a topic. So what we have is the law has been set for data integrity, but due to observations by the FDA, due to what's been happening in the industry, it's getting a lot more focus. Okay, pitfalls of data integrity. Why should you care about data integrity if you're in a GXP environment? Let's look at a little bit about this graph. This is a little bit different than what the Office of Manufacturing Quality puts out, the FDA puts out. This includes every warning letter that's been scrubbed for to isolate GXP warning letters. It includes everything, every FDA remote office, and everything also put out by the Office of Manufacturing Quality. This information is accurate as of last night. As accurate, and by accurate I mean it's exactly what's been, it considers all the warning letters posted off on the website since 2016 till last night. So just look at the trend here. We have 15.4% of the warning letters in 2016 dealt with data integrity. That's gone up in 2017, where 17.5 dealt with data integrity. And now look at the jump so far this year. Over a quarter of the warning letters, GXP warning letters that have been sent this year have data integrity issues. If you're in a GXP environment and the FDA is going to audit you, and if you're considering that 1 in every 4 questions would deal with data integrity, that should tell you why you care about data integrity right now. Okay, delving into 2018 a little bit more. I'm sorry, 2017, 2018, of course, your next question is, okay, there's a bunch of warning letters. Well, what type of observations are you seeing in those warning letters that deal with data integrity? Let's look at that. 2017, 38% of the observations were around incomplete production record data, 32% incomplete lab data, and 16% access controls. And I have PC as in personal computer, any type of computer system there. 2018, we have a 61% of the observations are incomplete lab data. So we have a little bit of a change so far this year. It looks like a little bit of a changed focus. 22% are access controls, and 6% are incomplete production record data. One interesting thing, if you do happen to be going to the FDA website or looking at warning letters, of course, if you have the observations in the letters, but do take time if you're doing any research around data integrity, like we stay up to date with this at Sequence. Do look beyond. If you may see an observation that says incomplete lab data, that may not indeed be lab, while it is laboratory data, it is analytical data, it may be from in-process checks. So when you hear about people saying, well, it's all in the labs, well, sometimes in-process checks are predominantly in the production floor. So those in the production floor should also be concerned about their data integrity. Okay, let's see some examples. We've discussed a little bit about what data integrity is and some of the pitfalls. I'll show you some examples of those pitfalls in the the regulator's words. May 2018, last month, incomplete data. Your firm failed to ensure that laboratory records included complete data derived from all tests. You did not include the 3 failures. You were unaware that your analysts had not reported the failing results. Another incomplete data example, again, last month, your firm failed to maintain adequate written records of major equipment maintenance. Now we're getting more into the manufacturing maintenance side of things. The logs did not contain adequate information to document who performed what operations and when. Multiple fields in the logs were blank. We go back to the complete data. Here's an example of the access controls I had mentioned in the prior slide for computers, inadequate access controls. Failure to exercise sufficient controls over computerized systems to prevent unauthorized access. Operators had full system permissions. Again here, all computer systems will have security systems. If everyone's sharing the same, if everyone is given full access on that computer system, that's not really a control against people accessing, having unauthorized access to the data. Again, inadequate access controls. Here's another example, and this is from April. Again, insufficient controls over computerized systems. A single name with administrator right. There was a single username with administrator rights. All users could delete or modify files. Again, that's sharing a single username and password is not an effective control to ensure data integrity. A little bit about the audit trails here. Failure to exercise sufficient controls over computerized systems to prevent unauthorized access or changes to data. Our investigator found that audit trails in your instruments were not enabled. That's a key piece too that we do see a lot. We need to make sure we're using the audit trails, make sure companies are using audit trails and using them considering a risk-based approach to ensure based on the criticality of the data that the system is creating or maintaining. One more from February 2018, inadequate audit trail, failure to ensure that changes to documents. Now, this is a document management system. Make sure that changes are reviewed and approved with maintaining change records. Your firm made updates to procedures on numerous occasions without documentation of the date the procedure was updated and the approval signature by a designated individual. Okay, well, when we consider all these, of course, these are observations. They're specific things of specific pieces of equipment and procedures that don't support data integrity. There's a failure there. So they really are symptoms of not understanding and mitigating data risks. So how can you avoid the data integrity pitfalls? So some of the most common characteristics of data integrity programs and some of the things at Sequence that we try to implement in understanding our various business partners and understanding their systems. We've isolated three of the key things that really seem to be differentiators of people with and without successful data integrity programs. First, the life cycle approach to managing data. And now consider, think data life cycle here. So we found the best way to approach ensuring data integrity is to give it a framework and to give it a framework that our industry is already familiar with. And one that fits into our existing quality management system. And when I say quality management system, I mean the overriding, the governance SOPs, the SOPs that would be there even if you removed a certain piece of equipment. It's the SOP that says when a piece of equipment or a system comes in, you assess the risk. So let's consider a life cycle we're very familiar with, the product life cycle at the batch level. So we're familiar with managing product moving through systems. In manufacturing drug products, and you can consider it in the labs, there's a similar example in the labs. The product moves from machine to machine being processed. We have attributes defined as critical and non-critical. We have inputs, we have critical quality attributes, which we've determined as important as critical attributes. And we also have the controls, which are the critical process parameters for ensuring that that batch, for controlling your critical quality attributes and trying to achieve your critical quality attributes. And also for this batch, there's a finite lifespan. So now I ask, couldn't these attributes also describe data? Can't data move from machine to machine? Perhaps considering data more like a process, like a batch in a process, and less like a piece of equipment or something that's simply in one machine or resident in one machine is the way to do it. Critical quality attributes would move to critical data, and the controls of critical data would just be critical data controls. So that we find that does fit in the framework, in people's existing framework, to help people understand data integrity and how to assure it. Okay, so I'll continue a little bit more on this point. The key to using a lifecycle-based approach is to understand the data life cycles within your process. You can see in this example here, you may have looking at the incoming potency of the data that's collected. And then that incoming potency, if you move to the right of the red line, you move into more of a retention stage. You'll notice that the retention stage is one of the, you can see this in the data lifecycle blocks in the bottom. Data, another thing to consider, data from earlier processes may go through stages at different times. You may go from you of course always start with the collection and recording stage. You may do the processing stage later. You may review your raw data. I think that's one of the things that has made it difficult for people to adopt the data lifecycle, because data has various things that can happen to it in the data lifecycle, they don't always happen in the same order. Okay, the second common characteristic of folks that have strong data integrity programs is they map their critical data flows. Moving forward with this concept of data is more, the product is data, data is the product. You can't have any GXP product on the market without data to support it. Once you map your critical data flows, you can understand what the dependencies are between your data. For example, here you see an HPLC, a piece of lab equipment feeding a LIMS system. So you can see what the dependencies are, where the data flows from. You can also, once you start considering our acronym here, our ALCOA acronym, and our life cycle stages, we can say, okay, in a LIMS system, a laboratory information management system, what's happening to the data there? Is it going through every life cycle stage? And if it's only going through a few life cycle stages, for each life cycle stage it is going through, what are the risks to Alcoa? You start to see that once you build this framework and consider your data flows, that you'll start to have a modular approach to assuring data integrity, which not only, of course, helps make sure you have data integrity, but will also improve your inspection readiness. Okay, let's see. So one other concept that's a word that's used in a number of different ways, a key point to mapping your data, genealogy is important. A particular piece of data may not be considered through an entire manufacturing process or laboratory process. For example, the raw material potency I mentioned earlier, but it must live and exist to support the product for the life of the product. So consider that child-parent relationship with data, just as you would with a batch that's been released. Finally, the third solution here for ensuring you have data integrity is to incorporate data integrity, incorporate the data lifecycle into your quality management system and these controls. Data doesn't just live in just one system. My example earlier, a piece of lab equipment may feed a lab information management system. A piece of production equipment may feed a production management system. Just like a product, data moves between systems. We need to assess the risk for each of those systems. We aren't just considering the system life cycle. We're considering the system life cycle and the data life cycle. The third bullet, risk-based approach to assuring data integrity. We see a number of places where people will just say, okay, we're going to treat all data as critical data. That's not always the most cost-effective way forward. We're driven to deliver compliance efficiently here, and there are ways we need to make sure we're using a risk-based approach to assure minimal risk to the patient. But at the same time, we don't want to add this extra overhead of saying everything is critical. Finally, the last point, a business and system level risk assessment should be used. Now when I say system level risk assessment, let's think of any technical piece of equipment. For example, a tablet press. You could think of the HPLC piece of lab equipment. You could think of a mixer. That technical piece of equipment, your technical experts on that equipment will, of course, know the system very well. But how are they going to know what data is critical, and how are they going to ensure they have the appropriate data integrity controls, and how are they going to ensure that they have consistent data integrity controls with a data integrity program that you can, so you can maintain a modular consistency in ensuring data integrity throughout your operation. So the answer to that would be, if you have an overall strategy, a business level risk assessment or business level strategy, that could be the that will give them something to look at and understand how their technical piece fits into the parent process flow. So wrapping up here, the key takeaways: data integrity is not new, but it is still a concern, as you can see by the FDA warning letters and the amount of increased focus on data integrity. There's a lack of understanding of how to assure data integrity. I mentioned a little bit about the data lifecycle and how that sometimes repeats, pieces of that lifecycle repeat out of the typical order. And finally, the final takeaway here is to maintain a strong data integrity position. Consider the data lifecycle, consider mapping your data flows, and consider integrating data integrity into your QMS or your overall procedures as part of a risk-based approach. A little bit more information for you. Here, you can go to these websites if you want to see some of the latest information on data integrity. So a little bit of reading if you want to follow up. And again, we try to stay very up to date with data integrity. If there's a warning letter that goes out, we're scraping the pages of the regulators, and so we know and we can help our partners go through any and be successful over data integrity challenges. Let our expertise help you, and contact us if you have any questions. Okay, and I know we're going to leave the questions to the end now. So Leah, if you can go ahead and you can take the screen, and I think Hutch has a couple things to say.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That was awesome. Great information to share, and hopefully everybody can see my screen now. It says Qualtrics Compliance Software in support of data integrity.
Yes.
Awesome. So what I plan to do, I'm going to talk about Qualtrics for a couple minutes, give you a little bit better idea of what we do, and then I'm going to talk about some of the data integrity pitfalls that Matt mentioned, and talk about how a good electronic compliance management system would help avoid some of those pitfalls. So Qualtrics, we're made up really of document management, which is going to be your place to store documents, control documents, enforce some access controls on who can edit and approve those documents. We have a process management engine, which is our workflows. That's where you can automate any process that the business has, control that process, and then be able to report on what happened during those processes. We also have a testing and training component of the product that automates testing and training, and again, it tracks that data. It's going to store the data from those testing and trainings. So everything is searchable and reportable in our system. It is a hosted solution. It's a very secure environment where we host Qualtrics. It's ISO 27001 accredited, which means that there's a good information security management system in place. Meets SSAE 16 Type 2 certification, and that's going to ensure that internal controls to protect data are enforced. It's also safe harbor compliant to regulate how personal data is managed. The solution meets 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. There are electronic signatures included, and we also offer a validation workbook that really walks you through the steps to validate the software. And if validation is not something that our customers want to take on, then we look to Sequence to provide those services to our customers. And the hosted solution, we offer 100% uptime guaranteed through that. So again, very secure environment. So I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls that Matt mentioned. So this FDA warning letter, you can see it's addressing inadequate access controls. There was failure to exercise sufficient controls over computerized systems to prevent unauthorized access. Operators had full system permissions is what they found. So the way that we would address that is through access controls. So you're going to manage who can log in to look at certain things. That's managed on an individual basis, not a shared system basis. There are electronic signatures that are required when you're approving or completing certain tasks. And there's an edit and approval process for documents, and it's going to track all of the history of that. The edit and approval process is also locked down by electronic signatures. And then the system's configured to prevent the deletion of documents and data. So it's going to ensure that you keep that historical information that you need to prove you did what you did when you did it. So let's look at this other warning letter addressing incomplete data. The firm failed to maintain adequate written records of major equipment maintenance. So the logs, they did not contain adequate information to document who performed what operations and when, and those fields that were left blank. Well, the way that you would avoid that pitfall is through process management. So we have a process management engine of the product where you can go and you can build workflows for any process, and those workflows are going to create structure, they're going to create accountability, and it's going to automate other processes. It's going to, everything about those processes are reportable. It creates visibility into what's going on. It's going to create some consistency across the organization because you're going to be able to control the processes that you have. You're going to do the same process over and over again. And then we also have some document lifecycle features built in that is going to capture all of the edit and approval process. So you can go back and review what happened to documents and when. So really controlling your processes in a consistent manner is critical here. So this other one, warning letter, inadequate audit trail. There was a failure to ensure that changes to documents were reviewed and approved, and they weren't maintaining change records. So the firm made some updates to procedures, looks like on numerous occasions here, without documenting the date the procedure was updated or the approval signature. So we would address that through change history. Really, you need to keep history of all the document revisions, the changes that were made, who made those changes, when they were made, and be able to pull that evidence up whenever you need it. It needs to be readily available, which is one of the things that a system like Qualtrics is going to ensure that you have. All the workflows, same thing. You've got all the routing history with those. So all your processes, you're going to have routing history. So you can, again, pull up that evidence whenever you need it to provide the visibility that the organization needs. And again, everything's searchable and reportable. So it gives great visibility from management teams, auditors, people working there. And here's an example of one of the documents that we have in the system and some of the information that we're capturing and what it looks like in our system. So you can see every document's going to have a unique document ID. You've got really good details of the changes that were made to documents. You know who the editor was, you know when they happened, you know who was involved in the approval process. And this is for all past revisions of the documents. So that's really all that I had. I just wanted to tie back some of those real life warning letters and show how a good compliance and quality management system should address them and really make your jobs and lives much easier. So with that being said, I think I'm going to turn it over to Leah now, and looks like we've got a few questions.
We do. Let me take back the screen share here. Okay, so we do have a few questions. If you haven't had time to type in your question now, you have a little bit of time while we answer the ones that we have. So go ahead and start submitting those. So I'm gonna kind of switch back and forth. We have some in the Q&A and some in chat. So we'll just kind of start at the top here. The first one we have is, how do you deal with an old instrument which has limited data integrity in a GMP testing lab?
I can answer that. So I guess I would guess your question would be that may have questionable controls around data integrity, because anything that has a limited data integrity, I would hate to present anything and say the integrity of this is questionable. Of course, this is something that's very familiar. That we don't all have the latest equipment in our facilities. That's really where the risk assessment comes into, and really specifically how you're using that, how in your business you're using that instrument. There may be ways, other controls you can put in place to assure the data of that instrument does have integrity. An example too, and again, this may not be the solution, the right solution for your business situation, but sometimes if there are not adequate data integrity controls around how a system is storing data, maybe you can real time and immediately write data to another more secure location that does have the data integrity controls. That's just an example of how you might deal with an older instrument.
Great. This next question is it's a little long, so let me see if I can read it correctly. So as per the MHRA, which is a UK regulatory agency, GXP Data Integrity Guidance and Definitions section 3.4 in March of 2018, they recommend undertaking a data integrity risk assessment, DIRA. So has anyone undertaken this assessment of their organization? This is from a lab that's GCP compliant clinical testing lab operating in the UK.
Yes, absolutely. And, this, Pamela, thanks for this question. This is, I have the right references at the end of this on my last slide there. So yes, a data integrity risk assessment. Of course, there's a lot of different ways to do a risk assessment. Our approach has not been to create necessarily a whole new data integrity risk assessment, but to somehow understand our clients enough to incorporate a data integrity risk, the assessing of data integrity risk, into an existing risk assessment. Of course, if you're in a GXP facilities, you are familiar with performing a risk assessment. In the interest of not adding not adding another document, another risk assessment document, and having things more easily accessible, we'll try to incorporate that into something that already exists. If not, there's sometimes it's a better fit to have a specific risk assessment around data integrity. When doing this, one thing I would recommend, just for further research, look into failure mode effects analysis. This is something that's common in organizational excellence and a number of different areas for assessing risk, not just GXP. But it's a risk method, and there are certain variations of it. But it's a way to document and get everyone on the same page with what the risk is, and also write down what your risk controls are. And if you can ensure that your risk level is you've been able to mitigate your risk appropriately, then it really doesn't matter what type of equipment you're dealing with, because this risk assessment will apply to just about any piece of equipment. You can have it apply. So I would say go there, research that a little bit, and of course give me a call or contact me if you want more information. But do I have a document called a DIRA, Data Integrity Risk Assessment? I don't have one of those. It's kind of how can you assess the risk appropriately, and in what mechanism, given each GXP company's specific environment.
Great, thank you, Matt. So we had an ask from Yi about more examples of incomplete lab data. Mentioned that so I know you had some examples of the FDA ones. Can you go into any more detail, I guess, on examples of what incomplete lab data would be?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so this is Yi, and I'll go through the couple you have here. Yes, agreed. The FDA FDA comments in the observations, they're specific, but there could be more detail there. One of the most common ones is just simply not filling out the information. If you have a method, a lab method, and it says to record certain information, to actually record that information. Particularly look at the areas where you might have a split in your process. For example, if you're doing a dilution and you didn't achieve the right results from your dilution, or you have to perform a further dilution and there's a split there, we need to make sure that is being recorded, because keep in mind, this data is the intent is that the data can be used to fully understand and recreate the process and step through the entire process. And if steps are being done and not recorded, then that doesn't allow us to do that. Okay, I'm looking at a couple of your other comments. Great.
There we go. Let's take a question from the chat too. We have one on Qualtrics. So how is the value added by Qualtrics better than alternative solutions?
Yeah, good question. One of the real differentiators of the Qualtrics system is the workflow engine, the process management engine. So we're not boxing up certain modules or processes and selling those to a customer. We're providing a platform where you can go and actually build and develop a workflow for any process that you have, and it's going to control that process. And so you don't have to change the processes of your organization to match the software. You can change the software to match your current processes. And so, yeah, that's really, you know, what one of the big things that jumps out. The other thing is Qualtrics is really designed for validation for 21 CFR Part 11 to meet those requirements, and so it's got everything that you need.
And that's part of the complementary, relationship between Qualtrics and Sequence. We're really trying to find, an easier approach, or sorry, a compliant approach, but an easier path to assure compliance. Things like modular testing, making sure we're getting of course, getting all the testing required to have compliance, but considering perhaps a modular coding approach, things like that, so we can test things and test the functionality completely, but perhaps do it in such a way that we're verifying the repeat use of a verified and qualified piece of code versus having to go in and, if like you say, Hutch, if something is put together with repeatedly used functions, that certainly makes validation much less burdensome.
Yeah.
Thank you. We do have a few more questions from Melissa. It was mentioned warning letter risk from improper access / user control and shared accounts. Does this A, mean that shared Windows service accounts for accessing the workstation are a risk? And B, if the user session is locked down militantly, how do you deal with apps that need admin access to function?
So this is, the specific situation here, Melissa. I, of course, have to understand the exact application. I'll have to fall back on understanding what the risks are for how you're using this system. Sharing Windows accounts, sharing accounts is not a good idea. But that said, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a situation where, given a extremely low level of risk, this type of thing could be perceived as acceptable. Let's see, if the user session is locked down militantly. So this kind of goes back to what we're really trying to do is assure quality, assure the quality of the data, assure the data integrity, and also ultimately assure that our patients are at a low risk. There are a lot of different ways to do this. Of course, the access controls, things like that, are part of that, and they all add up together to ideally to provide a very high level of assurance that there's not going to be any patient risk or integrity risk. So yes, there are alternative methods you can use. You can use, prevent people from being in an area where a system is. You can prevent access that way. But then it kind of comes down to your risk assessment, what the level of criticality is of the data in the system, and really, are you using one control that perhaps has some gaps in it, or are you using multiple controls that work together to where the sum of these controls create a more secure solution than just perhaps one militantly locked down system? I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Matt. We just have 2 more questions, unless some others sneak in. So one is, how would I transition to Qualtrics away from my old on-site system?
How would you transition to Qualtrics from your old off-site system? Is that the question, Leah?
On-site system.
On-site.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can answer some of that. Start with that, Hutch. Of course, you'll be more knowledgeable about the more the technical side of that. Okay, so any type of transition from what you have, I'm going to assume you already have a GXP compliant system, and you're transitioning to Qualtrics. The first thing to do is to be able to have a data transfer or data migration plan. You need to be able to get whatever documentation or information in your existing system over to the Qualtrics system, and that's something that Sequence has done a lot before, not just on document management systems or quality management systems, but also in IT databases, things like that. So it really is a migration. There's ways to do this that is efficient, and there's ways to do this that's not as efficient. So to be able to, if you're perhaps using another type of IT tool, be able to, in essence, validate that tool to verify that it's converting data as it should and migrating data as it should, and getting that verification and having that written up so you have documentation that there's assurance that the data was transferred and still has integrity. That's the way we would approach that. And I'm getting into the data transfer. I haven't mentioned any type of qualification or validation of Qualtrics, but since we're talking about migrating, I keep it to data migration. Hutch?
Yeah, and I'll just add, that was some good feedback there, but we do have some processes that we can help you with to migrate things into Qualtrics. And something that we do when we have new customers, we actually put together a statement of work, a project plan on what the Qualtrics implementation is going to entail. And so during that process, our project manager really will do a great job of figuring out exactly what the current system is, the state of that system, and what is going to be transferred over to Qualtrics. So really through the beginning stages of the implementation process is where we really need to get in and just have a better understanding of, again, the current system and what you're looking to migrate.
Great, thank you. We do have one more question. This one is from Brian, and the question is the process of equipment serialization a path forward to data integrity assurance?
And I can get this, Hutch. So Brian, thank you for your question. For those of you that don't know, equipment serialization is predominantly packaging related and supply chain related. This is putting, in essence, the 2D barcodes, at least in the US, the 2D barcodes on certain prescription packs so the product can be tracked through the supply chain. So I would say that the process of equipment serialization, that is in essence a project, something that has to be undertaken within the supply chain. Is it a path forward to data integrity assurance? Now, I will say that like any other product, data integrity assurance would have to be considered. I wouldn't think that serialization is necessarily the path that data integrity assurance is dependent upon. I would say that equipment serialization is one of the latest opportunities for us to include data integrity, assurance of data integrity to a greater extent, and to control data integrity to a greater extent, and to a more current and more recent effort. Thank you for the question.
Perfect. So that was our last question. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Give everybody just a couple of extra minutes back in their day. So I do want to thank everyone for joining us today and for asking some really great questions. I hope we were able to provide you with some valuable takeaways on data integrity. If you have other questions or would like to discuss these topics in more depth, we would welcome a conversation with you. As you can see, we do have contact information on the screen right now, so please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can help you with. Big thanks to Matt and Hutch for joining me today. And as a reminder, we did record today's session, so be on the lookout for an email with the link to that recording in the near future. So thank you again to everyone for taking the time to join us, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Leah.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matt.